Hello and welcome to our Finovate webinar. I'm David Penn, Research Analyst at Finovate. I'm joined on the line with Dean Nichols, the Vice President of Marketing for Jumio. He's the most recent addition to the executive team at Jumio with 25 years experience in B2B marketing, focusing on cloud services. At Jumio, Dean is responsible for all branding, PR, analyst relations, product messaging, demand generation, and sales channel enablement. Welcome. We're also going to be live tweeting this webinar, so you can join in the conversation by using the hashtag FinovateWebinar. Increasingly, financial services companies and retail banks are going digital, not necessarily by choice, but as a result of new competitive threats that include challenger digital banks, upstart fintech companies, and even the likes of Amazon and Google. In this webinar, we will focus on one key aspect of going digital, online identity verification. Today, you'll discover some insights and best practices from Jumio, the global leader in online identity verification, including the importance of offering multiple channels for ID capture. We'll also learn the subtle art of messaging and its impact on conversions, the critical need to reduce the number of screens, and why you need a yes or a no verification decision and not a maybe. Dean will give us an overview of ID verification, signatures, and supporting documentation, and how you can use these to avoid customer abandonment. Now, before we start discussing these issues, I'd like to remind you that we're going to be holding an interactive Q&A. If you have any questions during the presentation, you can send them to us using the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen. Also know that a recording of the presentation, including the deck, will be made available to all of our attendees by email after the presentation. And with that, I give you Dean Nichols of Jumio. Dean, take it away.
Thank you, David. I appreciate the warm introduction. And first of all, I want to thank everyone for carving out time out of your afternoon to attend this session. Hopefully you'll find it valuable and chock full of useful tidbits and information. So today, over the next 45 minutes or so, I want to cover really three primary topics. Why abandonment matters, especially during the online identity verification stage. Share 5 best practices about how you can increase your conversion rates. And then finally finish off with a few minutes about how Jumio can help in the entire process. So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about digital transformation. There was some recent research done, and it found out that 40% of folks haven't set foot in a physical bank in the last 6 months, which speaks to the fact that more and more people are turning to apps and turning to the website to do their online and mobile banking. And when this question was asked, how can consumers open new accounts? This was a poll done by DBR Research back in 2017. Most consumers were still required to go into the branch office, 98%. Many of them were starting to offer some website and online opportunities for creating accounts, but only 18% offered a mobile-specific app. Now, my guess is if we did a poll today, these numbers, in terms of the website and the app creation and usage has gone up quite a bit. And I think in many cases we can thank the challenger banks for that, because they put a high premium on the mobile experience since they don't have branch offices per se. But this is really just to kind of set the stage. The fact is that there's a lot of lip service paid to digital transformation, especially in financial services. But in most cases, this journey is really just starting. Now, as banks start to look at going online, what they're discovering is that there's really a unique opportunity. On one hand, they can cast a wide net through offering the ability to create accounts online. In fact, based on research done by the Financial Brand, just by offering the option to create accounts online, they were able to attract 55% more applicants. But on the other hand, they're actually losing more customers during the account onboarding process, often because the experience itself is painful, it's complicated, or just simply too time-consuming. So in this webinar, we're going to explore a little bit about the second part. How can we reduce the abandonment rate from 40% to something much, much less, right? At the same time, how can we help deter fraud? So when it comes to identity verification, there are a number of solutions out on the market. The core questions that really any financial institution needs to ask is, how well can the solution actually detect and deter fraud? And how well does that solution reduce abandonment rates and increase new account conversions? Now, based on the title of this webinar, which is 5 Surprising Ways to Reduce Abandonment, we're going to be focusing pretty much on the second part of this equation. So let's get into it. So typically, when we talk about fraud and we talk about conversion rates, there's often this trade-off. On the vertical axis, we have fraud detection. And so this is how sure are you, how confident are you that the person applying for a bank account is who they claim to be. On the other side of the spectrum, on the horizontal axis, is you have user conversion. Now, we know just from our own stats, only about 1% of people that are creating online accounts are fraudulent, right? So the question is how can you maintain the highest level of fraud detection while also getting as many people through the account setup and onboarding process as possible? But often there's this trade-off, right? So what that means is if you really want to make sure that someone is who they claim to be, you actually make them come into the branch office. You make them require physical documentation like birth certificates and passports, etc. It's obviously a bad experience. Now, again, as you saw in the previous slide, the vast majority of companies and banks still require people to come into the branch offices to create those accounts. Part of the challenge there, though, from a fraud detection perspective, is that most of the tellers at those institutions aren't really well trained to spot fake IDs, especially if they're outside their country. On the other end of the spectrum, there are a number of solutions that are fully automated. And what they will do is essentially let people go through the online identity verification process entirely online. But in many cases, they don't have a lot of checks and balances to make sure that the person completing that online application is who they claim to be. So there's a low level of assurance and accuracy, though the experience may be quite good. It could be a very quick and relatively pain-free experience for the person setting up that account online. Now, where you really want to be is up in that upper right-hand quadrant, what we call identity verification nirvana, right, where you have high levels of assurance and you have a really good user experience. And what's interesting is that we know that this, the importance of the user conversion is really important. In fact, it's really important for financial services firms who said that 48% said that reducing friction is their top priority. And again, when 99% of your customers are presumably good, you can understand why you want to make that experience as smooth and as painless as possible. So we're going to go and have our first poll question. And so I kind of want to get a pulse of where the audience is at. When you think about your business and you think about the account onboarding process, I'd like to know is, what are you more concerned about? Are you more concerned about detecting fraud? Are you more concerned about converting good customers, legitimate customers? Or do you care equally about both, fraud detection and increasing conversion rates? We're going to give this a second and let you guys answer this question. We're starting to ask this question a fair amount during our webinars, and sometimes the results are a little bit interesting. And if you've already answered this poll question, if you start thinking about other questions, we want to make sure you use the Q&A tab in this On24 platform to ask any additional questions you want me to answer at the end of the presentation. So start thinking about those as well. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and go on to the next slide to see the results. Okay, and this is actually not surprising. 75% care equally about fraud detection and increasing conversion rates. That's good. So you're actually attending the right webinar because we're going to be talking about both. Both are obviously very important. Okay. So as a segue, the things we're going to really cover, kind of the meat of this presentation, is the 5 ways you can reduce abandonment rates during the identity verification process. Right now, increasing conversion actually means a few things. One, it means is what we really care most about is how do you get the most assigned customers at the end of the entire experience. So there's really 2 ways to do that. One is to increase the size of the funnel at the very top. That means letting in as many people as possible and expanding that to as many potential customers as possible as you can. And holding all things equal, the larger the funnel, the more folks you should end up at the end of the funnel. The second things we're going to talk about in these steps are how can you improve that whole experience so that your actual conversion rates as you move through it are higher. So some of the tactics we're going to talk about actually increase the kind of the aperture of the funnel and let more folks in. And then other tactics we're going to be talking about, like the clear instructions and the user experience, have more to do with improving the actual conversion rates. Let's go to the first one, global coverage. So depending on the geography kind of your base, this may or may not be an important consideration, right? But you need, when you start looking for online verification solutions, you want to make sure you can find those that support the most amount of countries, languages, and ID types for your user community. Really, and it's not just a matter of driver's license and passports. You may also want to think about ID cards as well. Right now, increasingly, EU companies are also concerning themselves with local language support. And again, if you're a financial institution headquartered in London, your entire user base is in London, then this becomes less of an issue. But increasingly, we're finding many of our customers have aspirations of going global and extending beyond the UK, in which case this becomes an important consideration. What I have on screen is a little bit of an eye chart, but let me see if I can kind of help paint the picture. Many online ID verification solutions get away with claiming that they have global coverage by virtue of the fact that their technology can read the barcode on a driver's license, or the MRZ code, which is the machine readable zone on the back of most international passports. Right, but this doesn't mean that they can support all the versions of government-issued IDs, such as ID cards or older versions of those IDs. Right, so what you see on screen are all the different kind of combinations of IDs that we support, just to give you kind of a hint. So, for example, if you looked at Australia, which is in yellow, you'll see, for example, that we support passports, driver's licenses, ID cards, national ID cards, consular IDs, and other kinds of ID types. Most of the map is some shade of blue, and maybe hard to infer the different shades of blue from this, but by and large, we're accepting a wide variety of ID types across most countries and geographies, right? So you know that you're going to have some coverage there. So now the other thing that's important to understand here is that this also means that you'll need to have really verification experts and computer vision protocols that are proficient in all these different ID types, because each ID document itself has its own unique set of fonts, security features, and other like holograms and other things that ideally security experts need to consider. So, and maybe I should take one little bit of a step back when I start talking about these ID types. And maybe I should talk a little bit about how we do identity verification. I'll spend more time on this in the Jumio section. The kind of identity verification I'm talking about here is, and when we start talking about ID types, is that many, increasingly more and more banks and financial institutions, when people are creating new accounts, instead of asking for, what is your mother's maiden name, or, relying on SMS-based forms of authentication, they're saying, take a picture of your ID front and back, or your passport, or your ID card. Then take a selfie, right? So companies like us, what we're doing is we're making sure that ID is legitimate, it's authentic, and it hasn't been tampered with. And so then we would typically ask for a selfie, and this is all happening within that account setup process, and this normally happens within a few minutes. Then companies like us would come back with a decision, like this is a legitimate person, or this is not a legitimate person, or it's probably a fraudster. And so when I'm going through these methods and these ways you can capture more people, that's the user experience that we're talking about, right? So when we talk about more ID types on the slide, is that as you're asking people to provide a picture of those IDs as part of the verification process, again, you want to really kind of cast a pretty wide net here if you have aspirations of growing outside your own country. And this, number two, is accepting more ID types, and this is something I already kind of alluded to. Again, it's not just a matter of just driver's license and passports. You probably want to support ID cards as well, right? And even multiple versions of ID cards. So what's interesting with ID documents is that In some cases, there may be as many as 15 versions of a particular driver's license. Some that may have been issued 5 years ago, some may have been issued 10 years ago, some that are printed in landscape, some that are in portrait, right? For example, there are other ID cards that are commercial driver's license and some that are driver's permits. Each of these different ID types has a unique set of security features, right? So it's important as you accept more ID types that your vendor can support those as well, and not just the current version, but have the ability to go in time and accept older versions of those documents. We will even accept paper-based versions of some documents like old German documentation, like paper driver's license that are still in existence, are still being used, that were issued in the 1970s. And again, the more ID types, the more versions that you accept, again, you're casting the widest possible net that you can to get more people into the funnel, and hopefully more potential customers. The third way to essentially reduce abandonment rates is by offering omnichannel support. Many identity verification solutions only offer smartphone image capture and exclude other kinds of channels like desktop webcams. By excluding webcams and letting the users use their desktop computers, these vendors are often excluding a large market segments who are actually more comfortable using their desktops and laptop computers. A significant share of online verifications are based on the images that are captured from webcams, really depending on the application and the use case. So if you're a bank and you have a significant set of customers or prospects that are baby boomers, many of them may not be comfortable using their smartphone, right, to capture an image of their ID, or more importantly, taking a selfie. I mean, imagine if you're trying to create an account online, you're in a coffee shop, and now you're having to take a selfie while you're in line, right? Many people want the convenience of being able to create an account quickly and from anywhere. But when it comes to, for example, taking a selfie, they may be a little self-conscious. So giving your customers the choice to go through this onboarding process from either their smartphone or from a desktop or from mobile web, this gives you the chance to reach the most amount of people possible, right? And again, you want to reach people, even those that may not be comfortable with newer technology. Really, so it just makes sense to ensure that whatever solution you choose, you offer the broadest number of channels to capture as many potential customers as you can. And this is another important consideration. So when we talk about the desktop experience, increasingly more and more companies are essentially optimizing their websites for the mobile devices. And so what's important is that whatever solution you use, that experience, if people are visiting your website to create an account directly from your website and they're from their mobile phone, that experience, what we call mobile web, is just as elegant, just as simple to use as if they're doing it from their desktop, right? So that means they can create an account on the go. And again, your site needs to be mobile optimized so the screens render well really from any device. And again, I think you just need to think through and plan the whole identity verification process across all device types to ensure that the experience itself is a good one and a relatively seamless one. Step number 4 is providing clear instructions. Now, we work with a lot of banks, both traditional and challenger banks, as well as other sectors as well. And the companies that see the highest level of conversion rates are the ones that not only pay attention to the previous 3 steps, right, but they spend a lot of time thinking through what that user experience is going to be, right? And these companies are very mindful of the number of the screens that they're putting in front and how much context they provide their users. And speaking in plain English, right, that explains the process and the rationale for the process, right? Now, what I have here are a few screenshots from Monzo. When we rolled this out with Monzo, we spent a few months really thinking through and storyboarding the entire user experience to make sure it was a very elegant one, right? And so every word and every screen was labored over to make sure that people would understand the context. In the case of Monzo, where they don't have branch offices, they're relying entirely on the mobile experience to generate net new customers. And so for them, they know how important it is to have a very elegant solution. So they really thought through this, and where they can, they use pictures, right, to help explain the process. But there's no jargon. They speak in fairly plain English, and as a result of that, they experience much higher conversion rates. And so when I say much higher, companies that go through this and think through this are generating 15 to 20% higher conversion rates than those that don't, right, based on our own kind of customer base. And so it's really important to think through how you position each screen and the number of screens that you do for them. Along the same lines, you really want to think through the entire user experience, right? This means ensuring that the look and feel the verification process appears native. That means it matches the look and feel of your own website. More importantly, you need to reduce the number of screens. We've talked about that. If, for example, you're only going to accept people that are in the UK and only accept UK driver's licenses, then say so up front, right? And then don't give them the option to upload a passport. Now, you think this is obvious, but it's surprisingly, when you look at this experience across customers and across a variety of experiences, even if you look at companies like Airbnb and companies in the sharing economy, how well some companies do at this versus others. You should even think through accessibility issues, right, and potentially including a voiceover or using larger fonts for older folks like me. So all of these are important considerations as you build out that user journey. So those are the 5 quick tips that we came up with. But as we put this presentation together, we thought of a few others. So you're getting a few extra tips here as we're going to cover 2 more. The importance of instant feedback and the ability to manage compliance. And I'll talk about and try to connect that to increasing conversion rates and lowering abandonment rates. Let me start by talking about instant feedback. And what I mean by that is with most solutions out there, as someone is taking a picture of their ID, right, whether that be a British passport or they're using their driver's license, if the image itself is too blurry or there's too much glare, many of these automated solutions will just outright reject that image. That means that's one customer you will not get because you've provided them really a no answer, and that leads to a bad customer experience. Better identity verification solutions will return additional information about why an ID was rejected in the moment, right? So, for example, if the photo was taken of a photo screen, for example, we asked for a selfie, but instead of providing a selfie, they took a picture of their own picture in their driver's license, right? We can tell the user in real time, no, you need to actually take a selfie and not take a picture of the picture, right? Or if the picture is too blurry from the ID document, we'll say retake the picture, within that whole experience, and that's one more customer that you can salvage during the identity verification process. These extra details are exceedingly valuable for banks and financial service organizations to improve the conversion rates and actually to lessen the friction of the users. Providing just a little bit more information back to you in real time, we can help kind of your good users kind of get through the process by giving them the ability to kind of course correct. The other thing that's important to note about feedback is the actual decision that you get back. And this itself is probably another important tip, is that there's many solutions out there that return a score. And so for many other solutions, they might return a score of like, this is good, this is bad, and then this is iffy or suspect, right? And so you essentially get a score return. More and more of our customers are asking for a definitive yes and no when it comes to verification. They don't necessarily have a large manual review team to look at a large swath of IDs that come back as iffy or maybe, right? So you want to find a solution that really delivers a definitive yes or no, because the more maybes there are, it just means the more time you're going to be spending in manual review. And it's likely you're going to lose many of those prospects from creating new bank accounts or new accounts because they get tired of waiting for your manual review team to kind of render an answer. And this is an example of some of the kind of details that we provide at Jumio. So, for example, if the selfie was cropped, from the ID, or if the selfie was uploaded was a picture from their ID document. Or you can see other things. If multiple people were pictured in the selfie, this is just really looking at what we call the validity test for the selfie. But we have a variety of reason codes that we provide back to our customers. They then in turn can ask the customer to provide, maybe take another picture of the ID, or another picture, or take another selfie. All of these help your conversion rates quite a bit. Another area that we help is around compliance, and many companies that turn to Jumio are doing to help solve their eKYC, AML and GDPR concerns. But really, how does this help conversions? Well, in some countries, for example, the Netherlands, the government has mandated that certain parts of an ID need to be masked, pretty much redacted, right, before those ID documents can be stored. So for solutions that don't offer that redacting or masking service, that means that's time spent that they have to do that for them. That we, for example, provide that service out of the box as part of a core service. This means that you can actually accept more ID types from more countries compliantly, which allows you to actually reach more potential customers. So these compliance considerations can actually have a fairly material impact on conversion rates, not so much from the actual abandonment rates, but more from opening up the aperture, the letting more customers in at the top of the funnel. So those are your two bonus little tips and tricks. With that, by the way, I'm hoping at this point you guys are busily jotting in your questions and answers into the Q&A tool, because I'm going to spend the next few minutes talking a little bit about Jumio and how we can help. Specifically, how we can help with abandonment and conversion rates. So first of all, let me just tell you a little bit more about Jumio. Our vision is that when identity matters, trust Jumio. Our goal is to increase customer conversions, detect fraud, and meet compliance mandates through accurate and consistent verification of ID, identity, and documents. So this is what we do. We do this 24/7. We're the largest provider in the space. And that size and that scale means that we see a lot of transactions from a lot of different ID types from across the globe. And so this also means that we're probably, when it comes to machine learning, and I'll talk a little bit later about how we leverage different technologies, that scale really helps us develop better algorithms that help us do a better job of detecting fraud right from the outset. We offer three core solutions as part of our Net Verify suite. We offer ID verification, identity verification, and document verification. What we're doing with ID verification is that we're verifying that the ID document, whether it be a passport, an ID card, a driver's license, is a legitimate and authentic document, right? We also offer identity verification, and that's where we pair the ID with the selfie. We call this identity verification because what we're doing is we're comparing that person behind the ID is the same person pictured in the selfie. If we only did ID verification for customers, again, if I've just stolen your driver's license, I would probably be in possession of a valid driver's license, right? But again, if for banks and financial institutions who want to make sure that the person behind the transaction is physically present, we offer identity verification, and we do essentially this face matching between the picture in the selfie and the picture on the ID to make sure that they're one and the same, and that the first person is physically present behind that transaction in real time. The third pillar of our portfolio is document verification, and this is actually an important part of AML, anti-money laundering requirements. But in addition to the ID and identity, we also have the ability to have someone take a picture of a utility bill or a credit card statement or bank statement, and it can frankly be any kind of statement. And we have the ability to extract important information from that statement, including proof of address, right, which is an important consideration when creating new accounts in the EU. And so this combination of ID, identity, and document verification really helps raise that level of assurance that the person is who they claim to be. And as you add each one of these services together, you're getting higher and higher levels of assurance. So how do we establish trusted identity? Or how do we get to that identity verification nirvana? Well, we start with ID, and I talked a little bit about this in the beginning. And this is where we're verifying that the customer's ID is legitimate and authentic. We use a variety of different technologies. So we use machine learning, computer vision. We use some OCR. We still leverage verification experts, live human beings, because the state of the art now is that even with machine learning, machine algorithms are not always going to get it right. So, for example, in many cases, if someone's uploading a picture that's blurry or there's glare, in many cases, the algorithms would outright reject that as being unreadable. But many of those same images could be viewed by a human being and actually read and interpreted quite easily. Another example of that is where machine learning falls short is if the ID itself is expired and there's a hole punch in the passport. Machine learning often has a challenge of reading empty space. And so it doesn't actually see it. It doesn't see that hole punch, whereas a human would actually see that every time. Now, this doesn't mean that we're shying away from technologies like machine learning and AI. Far from it. We're investing heavily in those technologies because in time we think it can start to get much better at addressing where fraud is and where IDs have been doctored. But we still leverage verification experts, as many of our competitors do, to improve the quality of that decision. Now, the second part of establishing trusted identity is relying on that selfie, right? Now, again, we introduce liveness detection and biometrics into that process as well. What we found is that the fraudsters are ever evolving, and that when we required a picture of a selfie, for example, that some of the fraudsters, what they were doing is they were taking a picture of, let's say they stole a driver's license, and it's Tom Smith that's pictured on the driver's license. They would then take a picture, a real close-up picture of that picture of Tom Smith. They would upload that as a selfie, and it obviously would be a match, and they would use that to kind of try and trick the system. That's why we've introduced something called liveness detection. And we have a couple of different flavors of liveness detection, but if you're in the mobile SDK experience, we ask the user to follow a bouncing ball, for example, on screen. And we're watching that eye movement in real time and saying, yes, that person is physically present. So in addition to matching the face to the actual ID document, we've also embedded that liveness detection to make sure the person is physically present there during the transaction. You know, that in combination allows us to establish trusted identity. But one of the questions we often get asked is how are we different from some of the other solutions out on the market? And it really comes down to this circle. We typically offer more platforms, meaning we allow your end users to capture images via a mobile SDK and via webcam. We also offer an API experience as well. We are the most accurate solution on the market, and we measure accuracy in two ways. How well do we do at capturing fraud, and how well do we do at identifying the valid customers and letting them through, essentially unmolested. We typically leverage more technology than any of our competitors. That means we're using a combination of biometrics, computer vision, AI, machine learning, and verification experts to render the right decision. We have some of the highest levels of security in this industry. We ourselves are PCI compliant, which is a very high bar of from privacy and data protection. We take it exceedingly difficult. And that means that we're also AML and GDPR compliant ourselves. But this also means you can have a higher level of trust that our solutions are going to help you, in turn, become compliant with all the various regulatory mandates out there. We support more countries. I talked about the various different ID types and languages and even versions. In fact, we support roughly 3,000 different kinds of combinations of ID documents and countries, and across 200 countries and territory globally. So if you are a global company yourselves, or you have aspirations of moving globally, we can support you there as well. And then, as I talked about in this presentation, we support more ID types whether they be driver's license, passports, ID cards, national ID cards, etc., and even older versions of those, we can support those as well, which helps you reach a larger audience. And lastly, how can we help you? Well, again, we talked about our mantra, when identity matters, trust Jumio. From a very, very high level, we're going to help you optimize new account openings. We're going to help you better detect and deter fraud, help you meet your regulatory mandates, including AML, KYC, and GDPR, and do this by providing a seamless customer experience, one that customers are increasingly familiar with. So it looks like I think we have one more poll question, and this may seem like an odd question to ask, but because we are GDPR compliant, this means that we explicitly have to ask for your permission to reach out to you. If you found some of the information useful and you're interested in future events and webinars, and you want to learn more about Jumio, please tick the top box, and this will allow us to reach out to you going forward, share more information about our services. You can also obviously unsubscribe at any point from those, or if you just don't want to kind of be invisible, feel free, tick the bottom box. Obviously, we're asking this question because we value your privacy, but at the same time, we want to make sure that we're casting a wide net ourselves from a marketing perspective. And if you want more information, more white papers as they come online, just tick that top box. Okay, I am going to quickly move on, I think, to the Q&A session. So I think I'm going to turn it back to David, and we'll start the Q&A.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Dean, and thanks again for a very fascinating presentation on a number of levels, just about any of us who've encountered or to engage in companies that are trying to do that digital transformation as one of those issues or more in that process. So very, very interesting stuff. Let's go ahead and take a look at our questions. We've got quite a few that have started to pile in. And again, I wanted to remind everyone that you can ask a question for Dean by hitting that Q&A button down there at the bottom of your page, and we'll go ahead and get to them. Let me take a look at one here. This asks, how much automation is involved in Jumio's verification process? You talked a little bit about the role of both technology and human talent in the process. Could you maybe talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this is kind of a common misconception. We use automation in 100% of our transactions, 100%. So every single ID that we are capturing is going through some type of automation, whether that be OCR, computer vision, machine learning. But frankly, that isn't good enough. And it's not good enough to get the right answer. So we've taken this step further. Right now, the step further is by leveraging kind of identity verification experts that can make sure that that decision is the right decision. So for example, if the machine learning algorithm says the image is too blurry or there's too much glare, those experts can often provide the right answer by doing a quick visual inspection of that. There's another benefit of actually leveraging humans in the process, and that is it helps feed our machine learning algorithms. So this is a little bit of a nuance, but it's kind of an important one. So machine learning is increasingly being used to determine if an ID is fraudulent or not. Does it have all the right security features? Does it have all the right fonts and the right font sizes, etc.? And machine learning can start to identify that. There's essentially two kinds of models of machine learning. There's what they call unsupervised and supervised models. The ones where you essentially have a human telling the engine, the machine learning algorithms, yes, you got it right, no, you got it wrong, is essentially a self-correcting mechanism, and it helps the model improve itself. So machine learning, the best models are the ones that rely on lots and lots of data. And I mentioned we are the largest player in the space, and we're processing 200 to 300,000 ID documents a day. That means, for example, if you want global coverage, right? Machine learning works best when they've seen, for example, lots and lots of, say, Nepalese driver's licenses, right? If you've only seen one or two Nepalese driver's licenses, it's hard to develop a workable model. If you've seen 10,000 of them, your model actually gets quite good. And it gets even better if you have humans providing that last mile of of identity proofing. And so we leverage automation in 100%, but again, it's just simply not good enough. And so then we go beyond and leverage human verification experts for that last mile.
Excellent, excellent. Another question that came in touches on something else that you addressed during the presentation that maybe you could elaborate on a little bit, and that is simply what happens if a check is unsuccessful.
So what happens is we go through a series of steps. So the first thing that we do is we look at the ID itself. So for example, we have most of our customers use a combination of the ID verification and that selfie where we do the face matching. If we find, for example, the ID itself is fraudulent, it has been doctored or manipulated in some way, we don't actually go to step 2, which is to compare the selfie. We stop there. And we quickly provide a decision, usually within 60 seconds, back to the customer. And so some of the checks that we're looking for is many IDs have specific security features. I'll talk about, since I'm in California, I'll talk about the California driver's license. The California driver's license actually has your date of birth in 3 separate places. And some of it's hidden, some of it's in very small print next to your picture. It's obviously on the front side of the ID. It's also kind of near the barcode on the back side. If we're looking at an ID, and essentially this is all being done by automation, and we don't see the date of birth in those 3 specific locations, we're going to toss that out as being fraudulent, it's been manipulated. And so we would then provide that definitive no answer back to the business customer, and then they could then make their decision. In most cases, they would deny that account holder, and they would provide rationale for that. And so there's a long list of ways in which we identify fraudulent IDs, but essentially what we're looking at is we're effectively creating templates. And so for every combination of ID document, we're looking at the version of that ID document, we're looking at the country, and we're looking at the type of ID document. And based on that combination, we know what kind of specific fonts, security features, placement of where things should be on the ID. And we're looking for exact matches of those things. And when we don't find it, we're surfacing that up as an anomaly and rejecting those as being fraudulent.
Interesting. And it's funny that your answer actually sort of responds to another one of the questions that was coming up that I was going to ask next, which had to do with the ability to identify, or to verify rather, those specific ID documents, again, from other countries and some of the particularities they might have. And I thought your answer managed to address that question as well. Let's see, one other question that we had here, just a little bit more broad with regard to Jumio, and it's simply, does Jumio make recommendations and best practices suggestions to improve the customer journey?
We do, and so it's actually part of our out-of-the-box experience. So we will provide, every customer that signs up with Jumio is assigned an account manager. When you roll out our solutions, whether you're rolling out the mobile SDK for mobile users, you're rolling out the desktop experience, or rolling out an API-based implementation, we are going to work with you to walk through the steps and work through the verbiage. Customers have their own needs and wants, right? And so they obviously can control it, but we're going to tell them, if you can take the verification from 6 screens down to 3 screens, you're going to see much higher conversion rates. And we will show them and help them how to do that. So we have some new functionality, which is part of our custom UI, that allows us, for example, to match the color, the fonts, the branding, of a business, of one of our, for example, a bank's website, and match that to the user experience as they go through the identity verification process. We will walk them through that and make sure that that gets buttoned up. We will also provide fairly honest feedback if you're using a lot of jargon, right? Or there's places where potentially you could use pictures to help describe what you want the user to do versus a long list of text. We would provide that guidance as well. And again, because we have so many customers, we have companies like HSBC and Monzo and Metro Bank as part of our, just in financial services alone, as well as large companies like Airbnb and Coinbase that are part of our mix. We've learned kind of together with our customers what some of the best practices are. In fact, we've even won awards. Recently, we won several awards with Monzo Bank for the best user experience in this space. So we absolutely do provide that level of support and provide best practices guidance as part of the onboarding process.
Excellent. One of the things that you mentioned just a moment ago, and again, you've anticipated a next question, did have to do with some of the experiences that your customers have had and some of the ways that you've helped enhance customer journeys for them. You mentioned a few companies just a moment ago. I wonder maybe if you could elaborate on that, being as specific as you think is appropriate, on some of the specific ways you've helped certain companies make some of those improvements.
Yeah, well, I mean, part of it is because we listen to our customers quite a bit, right? So we learn from them, and in many cases they will share their conversion rates and their abandonment rates kind of before and after, and then they will do some tweaking. So, for example, one of the things that we've learned from our customers is that, and this is just a small example, is that they were a digital bank, and they were trying to figure out. They started to see a high level of abandonment when they started asking for a selfie. What they started to discover was that, and what they kind of inferred from the data was what they were finding is that many older people were starting this digital journey and creating an account from their mobile device, and they were being asked for a selfie, and there was some level of self-consciousness by the customers. What they discovered is if they reached out via email to those same customers that abandoned the journey and say, listen, you're almost there. You've finished about half of the process for identifying yourself. You can complete the rest of the process from the comfort of your own home. All of a sudden, these people that had abandoned the process on the first day were converting on day 2, right? And it was a very simple thing that they did, right? And that the data helped kind of guide them there. And I think there are certain things that we can do as a company to help our customers. There are certain things that the customer can do to help their own cause, right? And so first is kind of listening to some of the best practices that we share, but there are other things that they can bake into the process to improve those conversion rates. I'm not sure if that helps, but that's a very specific example of how we were able to help and how the customer was able to help themselves generate higher conversion rates.
Yeah, it does, and actually it points out, maybe obviously in some, but it certainly bears repeating, that a lot of what you're able to provide to companies comes from listening to them, what it is that they need, they think they need, what is it they've tried that maybe hasn't worked the way that they expected, and to some degree there's sort of that back and forth that can kind of help bring to the front the type of solution that's really going to be most appropriate. I have to admit, the point that you make about channels is one that I certainly myself have encountered. There's such a big, for example, interest in voice, for example, and then voice enablement with technologies, and I enjoy it, most of us do, but you find yourself on the train, or you find yourself in an environment with a lot of ambient noise right when you're in the middle of something, and all of a sudden what was your very convenient voice-enabled experience, now you've got to find some other way of dealing with this. Maybe you're on your cell phone, and now you've got to do a lot of typing with your big fingers, and so it's really helpful to hear you talk about some of these ways that you're helping folks who might otherwise say, the heck with it, I'm going to leave, to say, no, look, really, you can do it, you're almost there, and that the Jumio is in a position to help them do it. Want to take a look at a couple of other questions. We don't have many left. I do want to encourage those of you who are listening to our webinar today to go ahead and send in your question if you haven't done so. If there hasn't been a topic that we've covered, there's still some time to go ahead and get your question up here, and I'll be happy to send it Dean's way for his insight. One of the questions we had simply had to do with Jumio's pricing model. Is that something that you can discuss with us?
Sure. So the way our pricing works is that it's all based on the number of verifications that you're expected to perform in the span of a year or over a month, right? So we ask you to provide at least an estimate of that. And so for customers that are providing a few thousand, they're going to pay a certain price per transaction or per verification, whereas those that they are looking to verify 10 or 15 or 20,000 verifications a month, they're obviously going to be paying less. So there's volume discounts applied, but it's all based on a subscription model, and it's all based on the estimated number of verifications per month or per year. And it's kind of more of a sales question. They can get into it with you, but that's roughly how we're priced.
Sure, sure. And certainly people can find out more specific information for their particular organization and what they're trying to achieve as well on all of that. Also, sort of looking at some of the nuts and bolts of the process in terms of the time it takes to onboard new members. Is that something that Jumio has also been able to help really reduce that time and friction?
Yeah, and we could do it as little as within a day, honestly. And we've done that in some cases where there's been a real rush to kind of get something online. As I mentioned before, we worked with other institutions where we take a little bit longer, and mostly because we want to get it right. We want to think through the user experience, and the customer also wants to make sure that journey is relatively flawless and seamless. And so we spend a little bit of extra time on that, and that might take a few weeks, could take a little bit longer. It really all depends. In some cases, because of the urgency, we may rush something out the door, and we can do that very, very quickly based on the needs of our clients. But if they want to kind of, and again, they can always do that, and we can always refine as we kind of move forward. So it can take as little as honestly a day to as long as a few weeks. But that's kind of the time frame we're looking at.
Sure, that makes sense. One question, or actually it's a pair of questions, and I'm going to go ahead and combine them because I think maybe it might be easier to address them as one. And it had to do with any experience. The specific question was any experience that Jumio had with banks in the UAE, for example. And there was another question that asked about checking names against international sanctions lists. So I thought maybe just if you could talk just about Jumio's general global activity and reach, and maybe some of the things that you've been able to do on a world scale with the work that you do.
Yeah, in fact, most of our customers are global in nature. So when we talk about Coinbase and HSBC and Airbnb, obviously, they have a global footprint, right? And so in most cases, what we do is we will roll those out kind of essentially kind of country or region by region to make sure we have a good rollout of those. Sometimes, for example, with HSBC, we may start in in the UK, and then we'll roll out to Singapore, and then we'll roll out to others, because there's nuances with rolling it out in each region that we kind of need to kind of think through a little bit. But we have, as I mentioned, we do have global experience. We do work with some banks in the UAE. I'm not probably at liberty to name some of those.
Sure.
But we truly do genuinely have a global footprint. And so virtually every country, we have some customers that are verifying customers in those countries. As far as kind of OFAC checks and others, we do offer that through a partner, that those kinds of lookups as well. And so, and that's something that you're going to hear more about us in the coming weeks and months. We do have that functionality now. We're building that out in the months ahead.
Excellent. That's certainly one of the things I know that more and more, whether you've got international travel, people moving back and forth and so on, and some of the challenges, as you mentioned, with documents from other areas and things like that. So it's really interesting to see how Jumio has tackled this, and quite frankly, the wisdom of using partners to help with some of that work as well. Taking a look at our questions. I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
Yeah, sorry about that, David. The other thing I was going to also mention, in addition to kind of these lookups, in the UK specifically, they're looking for PEPs and sanctions. And again, through our partner, we're able to deliver that as well. And frankly, most of the players in our space, they will typically white label a partner to offer those kinds of real-time database lookups, because that functionality is a unique set of skills that third parties, other companies have frankly, a better skill set, and this is what they do for a living. So building that functionality from scratch, it doesn't really make a ton of sense for companies like us, but pairing with the best companies that do this makes far more sense. And so that's why when it comes to OFACs and PEPs and sanctions and these kind of database lookups, that's been our approach, is to partner with kind of the industry leaders.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense, and thank you also for that question. It was really interesting. I want to let everyone know that we don't have a great deal of time left for the webinar. So if you do have a question that you'd like to address to Dean, please go ahead and use the Ask a Question button on the platform, and we'll get that question in our queue. It looks like we're running about low on questions. I think we've got maybe one or two more that we'll go ahead and send his way. But if you do have one, please go ahead and get it up there, and we'll try to get that his way. I also want to remind everyone who's attending the webinar that a recording of the presentation, including the decks, will be available by email to all of you after the presentation. So if you missed something or you simply really want to revisit some of the information, there's going to be an opportunity to do that as well. So just wrapping up, let's take a look here and see if there's any other questions to go. Here's one. It's sort of interesting. Would you tell a customer they have a fraudulent document? If someone is a bad actor, that would just give them a heads up that their fake ID is not quite good enough for this reason. That was an interesting question. Is that something that you've considered?
Right. So typically, we don't do any of the messaging to the customers. So we rely on our business customers, for example, Monzo or HSBC, to provide the messaging back to the customer. Right. Typically, they'll say something like, your verification has been denied, and they'll provide them some kind of recourse as to why. Now, it's actually a very interesting question because with GDPR, customers have a right to know when they're denied a transaction that has what they call legal effect. Right? A legal effect could be they were denied credit, they were denied a mortgage, they were denied employment. These are cases where GDPR specifically says customers have a right to know within 30 days why they were rejected. Right now, under GDPR, we haven't spent a lot of time with GDPR, but both the data controller, which are pretty much all the people attending this webinar, and the data processor, which are companies like us that touch personal information, are responsible for meeting that 30-day requirement. Because of the fact that we have human review, and because we were able to say why a document was denied. For example, the image was too blurry, or the image, the selfie contained pictures of 3 people, like in the selfie and not, and we couldn't discern who the person was, or the document was hole punched because it was expired, or we found, for example, that the ID itself had been manipulated or doctored. We can provide that feedback to our business customers, who can then reply that information and granularity back to the person making that request. Typically, when customers or fraudsters are denied, they're not actually asking for an explanation.
Sure.
The other thing that I would also mention when it comes to fraud, so this presentation has been mostly about how can we lessen the hurdles and get more people to start and finish the whole process. One thing that's important to note is that we haven't talked a ton about fraud detection and fraud deterrence, but the very act of asking for a selfie is a major deterrent to fraudsters. And the reason is, and it may be fairly obvious, is that most fraudsters don't want to have their own image, their own likeness, captured by the institution that they're looking to defraud. Right? So if I've just stolen your wallet, David, and I found I'm now being asked for a selfie, it's very unlikely that my picture in the selfie is going to match the ID that I just stole. But it's also very unlikely that me, as the person who stole that, wants to let everyone know, including, the institution, put my name and my face on record as being attempting fraud, right? So that can have a real chilling effect, and we see major reductions in fraud just by asking for a selfie. Interesting stuff.
Well, thank you. Again, I'm afraid this is about all the time we have for our webinar today. I want to thank you, Dean, for joining us with a very, very interesting presentation. And of course, I want to thank all of you for joining us today. If you have any feedback on our webinar or any recommendations for future webinars, please do complete our short survey at the end of this webinar, which should flash up on your screen shortly. You'll receive an email with the recording of this webinar, as I mentioned, and an exclusive 10% discount for Finovate Fall coming up next week, September 24th through 27th in New York. Thank you all very much for joining us, and goodbye. We'll see you next time.